Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. I'm Ashish, the founder of RiseUp. I think you already know me. Welcome to this new episode of the RiseUp Radio. And today we have Janis Cooper with us. Janis is the director of leadership and staff development at Best Friends Animal Society. And today we have a very interesting topic with her. And the topic is about learning strategies and how can they be boring necessarily? But you know what? Horses disagree. And let's find out more about horses from Janis. So Janis, welcome to this episode. So please, thank you so much for joining in. Do tell us a little bit about yourself and Best Friends Animal Society to our audience.
Well, thanks for the opportunity for me to be here and talk about some of the work that I'm doing at Best Friends Animal Society. We are an organization within the U.S. That is primarily trying to stop the killing of dogs and cats in shelters. We have a large sanctuary in Utah of more than 1,200 animals, which includes beyond dogs and cats, but I'll just leave it at that. And we have about 900 employees. So I'm responsible for designing and delivering the HR related training.
Okay.
I also do behavioral assessments, provide leadership development and team building.
Awesome. Well, great. Thank you so much for taking on the time and joining us today, Janis.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to jump right into it, Janis. Right. So as a topic, we briefly said, and I'm going to, dig more into that. There's a very common perception across folks that, corporate learning is boring. And whenever you hear the term training or, learning and development program, typically you picture boring lecture halls, videos, quizzes that people don't seem to take a lot out of, right? What has been your experience about this? Because you have been a practitioner in this space for a very long time.
Yeah, prior to getting into training and facilitating, I was actually in the high-tech industry and didn't do that. And yet I was a recipient of a lot of that training. And I think prior to the advances that we see in technology, learning was pretty much the same, whether it was at work, whether it was at school, and it was boring. You were lectured to, it assumed that everybody learned the same way. The instructor oftentimes jammed as much content in as possible, and it simply wasn't engaging, right? And so I think all of us have been there one time or another, to the point where it's probably even hard to recall the specifics of what the training was, right? Because we were so bored and it just didn't stick. But on the flip side of that, I recall one particular sales training instructor from 20 years ago, and his name was John. And people loved to go to the training that John did because he was dynamic, he was funny, and he had been in sales, so he had a lot of credibility with the audience. And he would sort of navigate around to the audience and talk and get off the stage. He would call people by name, and he would tell a lot of stories. And participants loved it. They had a lot of fun, and yet they also learned in the process. Now, we're not all comedians, but we do have stories that we can tell, either our stories or other stories that make the learning more relevant. And there's lots of ways using technology today that we can also make it engaging.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And being a trainer myself, and I've experienced a lot of training programs myself, I think engaging the learners and audience is the most important thing, right? If you're able to do that, it basically turns out good. If you're not, it turns out bad. In your experience, what is the impact of a good delivery or good training program vis-a-vis, let's say, a bad one to the learners and hence the organization who's actually, spending dollars on delivering that training?
Yeah. Well, I think, learning has to start with a strategy. We have to understand the goals and objectives of the training, the audience that we're training, kind of what some of the barriers are that they might be facing today, or what are we trying to teach them? So once we have that strategy, we have to have a well-built design that's really going to help deliver upon those objectives. So I think the good learning experiences address what pain points exist or what change is needed and why, And then it's made relevant to the user or the learner rather, by using examples that they can relate to. And of course, it needs to be engaging. On the flip side, I think the bad learning experience is just what we talked about a few minutes ago. It involves lecturing. It means jamming too much content in. It's not relevant and it's not engaging the audience on a frequent basis. And I think too is what's important to a good learning experience is also checking for understanding, right?
Yeah.
Research says that 75% of content taught in training classes is lost within 6 days. So if people aren't understanding and they're not having the opportunity to apply it right away, chances are it's not going to stick.
Correct.
It's just not.
And hence very low ROI, right? At the end.
Right.
Awesome. So how can L&D teams start to focus on bridging the gap between going from bad to good, or maybe even good to wow, right?
Yeah. Well, I think it begins with having that strategy that I talked to. We also need to think about the environment and the culture. And I think culture becomes really important because if we're working in an organization that doesn't sort of have that growth mindset and doesn't value employee development, and it's just not a good situation to be in. It's unlikely that an adequate budget exists for training.
Yeah.
People perhaps aren't incented to be trained. They're not held accountable for training.
Yeah.
And it's those kind of cultures that we often see a lot of employee turnover, don't we?
That's true.
So I think when it comes to the learning environment, we need to really provide the right setting, the right technology, the resources, the programs, and also the process to support the learning. And that means that we have to keep it engaging, right?
Absolutely. And then that basically brings me to the question of experiential learning, right? What is experiential learning? And I know that you have a very special program in this area. So do tell us about that as well.
Yeah, so experiential learning really engages the learner in an experience. And sometimes we, can think about it with ropes courses, which were popular for a number of years. So it's really focused on delivering this direct experience that's focused on reflection. And so what I actually do is something called equine facilitated learning. I also call it EFL. And it's an experiential learning that's become increasingly popular for training because it's engaging all of a person's senses. It's really profound, it's memorable. And the important thing is it really helps support change and do it in a quick way. So to your point a moment ago, it has a really good ROI.
Right. So tell us a little bit more about this program, right? What do people experience as when they come in to the program vis-a-vis when they go out, right? So what is that transformative experience that they go through? You talked about, touching their different senses. So how does it work?
Yeah, I know people are always perplexed. It's like, I don't want to get on a horse. So we don't actually put people on horses. It's all groundwork. And what I often do will understand what's the objectives, what are some of the challenges that a particular person or a team is having. And then I design activities meant to be accomplished in partnership with the horse.
Okay.
And what happens is what we often see with teams and people is that how they're getting that task done is reflective of how they're actually doing things in the workplace.
Give us an example, Janis. I'm sorry I'm cutting you off. I'm really excited to hear one example, maybe.
Yeah. Well, the one I like to give oftentimes, it doesn't involve a team, but it involves a person that came to work on her leadership skills.
Okay.
And we teamed her up with a horse by the name of Andrew. And Andrew was a tall, thin thoroughbred, and he was off the racetracks. And I said to her, I want you to walk Andrew from point A to B in the arena. I said, the thing is that you're not going to be able to touch him. You can't bribe him. There's not going to be any lead rope on him. You need to be able to influence Andrew to follow you.
Wow.
And so they set off and they were a great team. Andrew's following alongside of her. And then they made it down to the far end of the arena and took a corner. And it wasn't too long after that, that Andrew just stopped dead in his tracks. And he just focused ahead and watched her as she continued to walk on. And then realizing that Andrew was not with her at all, she finally stopped.
Right.
And so I called out across the arena, what happened at the very moment that Andrew stopped following you? And her response was this: it's when I started to doubt myself.
Oh,
She said that, yeah,
wow.
it was profound for her. She said, I felt really good. And then I started thinking, oh, this is a fluke. This isn't going to happen. It's not going to continue. And that's exactly what happened.
And right then.
And yeah, right then it was like she knew it. And so we talked about where else that happens. And she said, it happens all the time at work because I'm not confident. I don't think people are going to follow me. And then I just struggle. And the difference with Andrew is he's very sensitive. Horses are very sensitive to what's going on with our body. And when there's not an alignment with our thoughts and what's going on physiologically, then they don't feel safe. Right. And Andrew no longer felt safe because of the way she's showing up.
So that was basically my next question to you. Why horses? I think you've answered part of it already, right? But tell me more. Why horses are the right fit for this kind of a program?
Well, it's interesting. When you think about horses and people, you think there's a lot of differences, and obviously there are, but there are some similarities. So they share this sort of relational social structure, very similar to us as humans, right? They rely on leadership, and there's a dependency on others. And while they can survive without others, they don't thrive with others, just like humans don't. But the big difference is that horses are non-predatory animals versus humans, which are predatory.
Yeah.
And as a non-predatory animal, they must be vigilant for their survival. So the way that they've evolved is to have these highly developed senses that enables them to read the environment and determine whether they feel safe or whether their herd is safe. And their response to being or feeling unsafe is not something that they have to think about or ponder. Rather, it's immediate, and they're going to move away from whatever or whomever they don't feel safe with.
Yeah.
So, if they're feeling safe, on the other hand, they're going to stay, they're going to build connection, and they're going to follow you. So you put yourself in that influence position. So it's very relevant to the workplace, right?
Yeah.
Because if people don't feel safe,
and
they're not engaged, right? It's difficult.
They're going to withdraw, just like that.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the lesson for people when we're engaging them with horses, or part of the lesson is, what we give off beyond words has a huge impact on our ability to build relationships, to influence. And the great thing about horses is they point it out to us in an unbiased way. They do it immediately. And they let us know if we're eroding trust with people, as an example.
Awesome. That is really awesome. Well, great. So tell me, you picked up one example here, right? And you also mentioned that probably it's very situational and contextual to the individual who's going through that program. So that means that you can tailor the program to any skill that is required to be imparted on during the program. Is that so?
Yeah, exactly. So oftentimes I'll work with a company or a leader and say, what do you want to get from this? What are some of the things that you're seeing today? What are some of the challenges? And so oftentimes it's around teamwork or developing leaders. And the leadership is, and even team, it's a big, broad topic when you think about it. It's cultivating that trust and empathy. It's communication skills. It's setting boundaries. So sometimes we design something that the leader might think or the team thinks that they need, but what surfaces are some other underlying issues that nobody has been talking about. So it really can sort of evolve and morph as the workshop goes on.
Hmm.
But when I run management development programs, we focus a lot on communication, the body language.
Hmm.
So I'll design those activities for people to work together alongside a horse and to see how they're communicating.
Yeah.
Do they build a strategy?
Yeah.
What happens when you don't have a strategy?
Yeah.
So those kinds of things tend to come up.
Right. And how do the participants react? I mean, are they a little apprehensive to begin with? Because, yeah, you're dealing with animals and you're dealing with horses, right? So there could be some natural apprehensions to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is interesting a lot. You know, sometimes you have people that say, I have to go. I was told I need to be here. Right? and they come not because they want to be there. And I think you always have this mix of people that are curious. And then there's people that might be curious, but also petrified. You know, they've had an experience with a horse or they know somebody that has. And so they're really leery of that. But also, especially for leaders, fear and ego get in the way because let's face it, animals are big. And if you're not familiar with them, it can be intimidating. And this is where a leader's ego comes into play, where that fear is going to generate behavior that's not conducive to the rest of the team.
Yeah.
So everybody is actually on a level playing field, which is the other thing I love about this work. The horses don't care who's the leader.
Absolutely.
They don't care what kind of car you drive, how much money you make, right? They just care about how you're showing up.
Yeah.
And whether you're authentic.
Which is your true self, right? And given that, you're shedding off your cloak of that ego and, the bare emotions are coming out. So then you're not hiding anything. You can't hide anything after that, right?
Right. And ego is part of us as humans, but when it's taking control and dictating to other people and not thinking about the other people and being empathetic, then people don't feel safe. And that's, egos don't exist in a horse herd because their job is survival.
Correct.
There is no place for it.
Awesome. So cool. Let's basically take a step back, right? And we started with the overall aspect of leadership development as a topic, right? And this experiential learning that you're doing is one of the initiatives. When you end up working with leaders and trying to sell these programs to them, right? Obviously, they have to sign off on the budgets, right? How do you end up convincing them in terms of, okay, fine, this is the budget that we should actually invest in our people? What are the drivers that you look at? How do you convince the leaders to basically, give you the dollars to spend on programs like this?
Yeah, so within Best Friends, it's a little different because it's sort of part of my overhead and everything, and people have heard enough about it that they actually seek it out. But when I'm working with other companies, it's really talking about the ROI. It's an investment of a day, it's an investment in the training, but the change can be profound for individuals and for teams. It's a learning experience, but it's also fun. It gives them lots of memories. I've heard people say to me afterwards, we still call that the Andrew syndrome, to represent something that a horse did. And when they see it in the workplace, they've now dubbed it something.
That relatability is very high.
And so there's this unique experience that has brought a team together and allowed them to learn and develop and to notice things that perhaps was the elephant in the room and nobody spoke about it, or to understand one another different outside of the regular work environment. So it's those kind of learning experiences that really have that tendency to stick, doesn't it?
Right. And how do you measure the impact of these programs, Janis? What metrics or KPIs do you use typically?
So when I'm using EFL in the context of a management development program, we're not really just measuring that, but we're measuring how effective was it in addition to the rest of the program. So we have them evaluate their skill level based upon the program's objectives before they start the program. And then we do it after the program is over. So we've got a feeling from this is where they were, this is where they're at, and how is this impacting their ability to do their job as a manager, for example. So we collect a lot of the information in Microsoft Forms. We have a large data analytics team at Best Friends that helps us interpret the information and pull it together in a report. And so we look at what the overall response is from that, how, what kind of skill sets were increased as a result of the work that we do.
And is there any measurement of functional and business KPIs after the training program is done to be able to also see how is that training program leading into, the business impact or the dollar impact for the organization?
Yeah, we're not quite there yet. We're in terms of the dollar impact. We're collecting more and more information within Best Friends around, let's say, employee exits. So understanding if somebody went through this program and there's a high turnover within that person's department, really trying to understand why is that happening? What do we need to do to change that? So longer term and not too far in the future, our goal would be to say, oh, these programs had an ROI of X, Y, and Z because we've seen employee retention improve.
That's a big metric, right? If you're able to touch that, that's basically gold standard already.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
As we know, as trainers, it's ROI is always difficult, right? It can be really subjective.
Correct. Right. Cool. And how do the practitioner, how do the participants take this program? I mean, you did tell us about it, but give us some anecdotal examples of change that people saw, and then they came back after 6 months and they shared some stories with you.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you asked that because I just ran into somebody at a training last week that had been in the management development program and had done the work with the horses, which she found profound. And she tended to have a more dominant style of leadership. And through one of the horse activities, it really became apparent to her as to how she was showing up because the horse wanted nothing to do with her. And she had to practice on the spot to try to make that connection to influence the horse in the activity. And so when I saw her last week, she said that I still think about that horse, and I think about, how I just didn't know the impact that I was having on other people. And it has significantly changed the way I show up. And she said she basically changed her thoughts and her energy when she's working with people as a result of that. And, for all of us that train, the highest compliment can be when they're talking the training up to other people. And that's what she said. Is she goes, when are you going to do this program again? Because I've been talking it up to other people. So when you've got your participants out promoting it for you, that's when you know that your training's had good impact, right, Ashish?
Oh, absolutely. Well, great. So as some parting thoughts, Janis, for somebody who's in the leadership development and L&D arena, how can they basically start thinking about totally transforming their programs, right? Some quick suggestions that you would like to make to them.
Well, I think we just can't check the box off on training. Training is so impactful and has so much to do with whether we meet business results, but it doesn't have to be boring. Going back to your original question, the more we can engage people, the more relevant and timely the information is. Along with providing those regular nudgers or reminders about what they learned. And that's what I love about Risely, right? Is that they're, specific to the individual and it gives them those nudges and everything. So, and I think just, think outside of the box, look at what organizations are doing. And it sounds like you're doing a great job on exposing people to some of the possibilities that are out there. And, be willing to take a risk on some things different. Start out with it small, and if it's successful, then grow it.
Awesome. Well, there you go, folks. So like we said, learning need not be boring, right? You can actually make it really interesting and experiential, as long as, folks get the context right, what you're learning, and you really learn it, for the long run. And that's what's going to create a successful learning program. Thank you, Janis. Thank you so much for taking on the time. I really love this discussion, and maybe one day I would love to experience that program myself along with you.
Love to have you join us. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, folks. That's it for this episode. See you in the next one. Take care, folks.